is a powerful influence on mediators and mediation because it affects how conflict is perceived, how it is communicated, and how it is resolved. These are all products of culture because culture in itself is our worldview. It is a way of life, and it is what we transmit from one generation to the other through socialization. And therefore, a mediator's awareness and respect for cultural differences are crucial for bridging divide and helping parties reach a mutually agreeable solution or resolution to some or all of the issues in their conflicts. And because of my practice experience, I want to delve more into some of the things that I've met that gave me these insights on how culture can influence mediation and also mediators. So from the outset, I will be providing some of these practical examples that I've seen because so many times I used to tell people that mediation is not what you learn in the classroom. Mediation is what you practice in the field that nobody ever tells you about. So culture encompassing values, beliefs, communication styles, and norms impact every aspect of the mediation process. In fact, even the way we dress. And that is why the greatest tool of a mediator is your analysis of conflict, but beyond the analysis of the conflict, to also conduct conflict sensitivity when it comes to your intervention, especially when you're dealing with a different culture altogether. I remember once trying to facilitate a mediation between the key political parties in Sierra Leone, and I thought because I was meeting mostly government officials and diplomats, that I should dress in suit and tie. But unknown to me that the red tie was a symbol of one of the political parties, and that indeed they are mandated by the then government to wear their red ties every Thursday and Friday. And here am I going to facilitate this political disagreement between the two major political parties ahead of the elections, and I was already identifying with one of the parties in dispute. So nothing is taken for granted when it comes to mediation. Let's look at communication styles. I'm sure that you may have engaged in a situation where somebody says, "You're shouting at me," and your response is, "This is my voice." Again, giving an example of what I've met in the field. An ex-military officer goes to establish an NGO and asked me to facilitate a strategic planning session for him and his colleagues and their members. And when I was engaging with the members of the organization, including his internal staff, what they told me is that he's always shouting at them. And when I tried to interrogate further, I noticed that all he knows is command, because he's an ex-military officer who now suddenly got passion into development world and wanted to establish an NGO. So cultural norms dictate whether a communication style is direct or indirect, assertive, or even differential. High context or low context, a mediator needs to understand these differences to interpret messages accurately and avoid misunderstandings. Remember, in mediation, we say that the spoken words are easier than the unspoken words. You can imagine if you go to a Francophone country where some of them greet on the cheek, you will think it is the same one on the side and one on each of the side. In some countries, they actually do 3. So as you are doing 2 and trying to leave, you will notice that somebody still wants more. The same thing with negotiation styles. Culture can affect whether parties approach negotiation competitively or collaboratively. In some cultures, achieving a harmonious consensus is valued, while in others, individualism and competition are prioritized, because what your people will ask you is that you lost just because you compromise on some issues. So, and remember that we say that mediation, for example, is a failed negotiation. So you can imagine if you have 2 people or 2 parties coming from these different backgrounds, how will they approach mediation? As positional negotiators or as interest-based negotiators? So you need to be mindful of that. Then cultural influence on mediation. Values, core values, cultural values, such as importance of community harmony versus individual rights, can determine what each party seeks in a resolution. And mediators have a duty to help them find a solution consistent with both parties' values. How do you balance that? And I make emphasis on issues around values because in itself is a very complex conflict to resolve because it borders on our worldview, it borders on what makes us human. So the cultural the trust and rapport, the cultural background of the mediator can influence the trust and rapport they are able to build with the parties. In some cases, a mediator from a similar cultural background may be preferred. In some cases, yes, as they are often seen better able to understand cultural nuances. I don't know if some of you followed Mandela's mediation just following the genocide in Rwanda. One of the parties in conflict told him that he cannot come because he is coming to address majority versus minority and that he's coming from a majority ethnic group. And when Mandela arrived there, in his true characteristic, the first thing Mandela said is, I want those who said I am from majority to please tell me what they think about me coming from a majority ethnic group and yet maltreated by a minority ethnic group. So sometimes an insider mediator may be more valued, but in some instances, parties may prefer outsider mediators. But why do they prefer insider mediators? Because they feel that you will understand their context, you will understand their culture, you will understand their behavior, and you have empathy. So you can imagine if you are going to mediate in a country like Ghana, where most of the communities are matrilineal in nature, and you are coming from a patriarchal society like Nigeria, I hope you begin to now appreciate how culture can influence not just the mediator, but mediation processes. Conflict perception. Culture shapes a person's perception of conflict itself. Some cultures view conflict as a positive opportunity for growth and change. I'm sure you have met this. I don't know how true it is, but that it is the Chinese definition of conflict, while others see it as a disruption to be avoided at all costs. So naturally, those who see it as an opportunity for change or for growth will be more receptive to conflict, while others will try and avoid it at all costs. And if you refer to your conflict handling styles, you will know that each of them comes with its own challenges. Emotional expression. The way people express and deal with emotions vary from one culture to the other. Again, I cannot say how true it is, but I'm told, and my colleagues have confirmed that in Burundi, a woman is supposed to give birth keeping her face straight without any iota of pains. Otherwise, that you transfer it to the child, you transfer the pain to the child, and you're saying it is a bad thing that I'm pregnant. So if you're coming from that, how will you see a woman who is giving birth, no shouting, no crying, keep your face straight and give birth? So mediators must be skilled in recognizing and responding constructively to emotional expressions that may differ from their own. Again, it is generally proven that women are more expressive than men, because in our climb, you are told to be a man until you die, and yet most people don't know that crying is what is made by God to reduce emotions. So, but you can imagine if you're a mediator and you suddenly see a man break down, you would think an extraordinary thing have happened if you're not from that cultural background. So these are just some of the elements of culture in mediation. Stereotype, because culture is also about stereotype, it's also about prejudice, it's also about presumptions, it's also about feelings, fears, and benefits. But all this, you notice, occur during our conversation, how we listen, the kind of empathy that we give. Are you asking a question? Sorry, Lamin. Is that question for us? Okay. So all these elements influence not just the mediator, but the mediation process. So what then is the role of the culturally competent mediator? Mediators must move beyond their own cultural biases to facilitate an effective process. So the first thing you do is to study the culture and the background of the disputants. That will enable you drop your biases, but also, as I'll come back later before I end this, to also know your own limits. There are things that you cannot offer. I've seen a friend who told me, never in my life will I mediate between gays or lesbians. So if you already know that as a cultural barrier, then you opt out of the mediation because you can never handle that kind of issue. So it is important to know that culture is just one factor that can impact mediation, just one of other several factors. Other factors such as the parties' personalities, the nature of the dispute, and the mediator's skills and experience can also play a role. So even with all your cultural awareness, if you're not competent in certain kind of dispute, that can also be an issue. So it goes beyond just culture. But however, by being aware of the role of culture in mediation, mediators can be more effective in helping parties from different cultural backgrounds reach a mutually agreeable resolution. So the role of the culturally competent mediator also include, number one, self-awareness. Like I said earlier on, acknowledge and understand your own cultural biases to prevent them from influencing your practice. And you also know your cultural barriers and the no-go areas for you. Okay, if you're a misogynist, for instance, it will be difficult for you to mediate in conflict that involves marital or spouses, right? So you need to understand and drop your own cultural biases. Education, learn about the different cultures involved in the mediation to better understand the disputants, their perspectives and their needs, but also how to negotiate their interests. Respect, show respect for the parties' cultural differences by avoiding assumptions and acknowledging the importance of their beliefs. And it becomes even worse when it has to do with values like religion. Okay? Adapting the process, the mediation process should be adapted to the cultural needs of the parties. Again, while I was doing some... When I was doing a mediation or what I call dialogue processes with 5 communities in Jos Plateau crisis, the Anafizere, the Anaguta, the Biroms, the Hausas, and the Fulanis. One of the things that we created on the agenda was, instead of saying break for prayers, we factored in our break and added 30 minutes extra without calling it break for prayers. That's paying attention to people's own needs. So if you must adapt the process, please do so to accommodate all parties' culture or their beliefs. This can involve changes to the structure, communication style, and overall approach. Okay? And again, in that Jos Plateau, even though we had made a case to ensure that women were on the table, right? We said a community leader, a woman's leader, a youth leader, and any other 2 persons, right? But we also noticed that the Fulanis came all men, because for them, their women should not be on that table. So we had to change the structure, we had to change the style, we had to change the overall approach, even though we had given a criteria. But you must pay attention to that. Using interpreters in cross-cultural disputes, this is a major issue. It may be necessary to work with a cultural interpreter or consultant to ensure effective communication. Sometimes language can be a barrier. What you consider as a joke in one community might be different from another community. In Gambia, for example, they use so many very sensitive jokes, and everybody takes it because their culture says so. So somebody can joke with you, something that is true, but can put it as a joke that your mother slept with the grandfather. And they accept it. That is part of their culture. And in fact, they said it has developed, or rather have strengthened their resilience to conflict because they can joke about almost everything. Focus more on the interests. A culturally sensitive mediator can help parties shift from power-based positions to focusing on their underlying interests, which can help correct power imbalance. In some instances, you know the meaning of the so-called freeborn and especially for the Igbo communities and the Osus. So you can, as a mediator who is culturally aware, shift parties' focus on power-based positions to focusing on what the interests are. So let's now look at some of these type of cultural mediations. The term cultural mediation can refer to several different practices. Intercultural mediation is one of them. So this involves facilitating a dispute where the parties come from different cultural background. I've mentioned that before. Then you can have cross-cultural mediation, which describes a situation where the disputants are from the same culture, but the mediator is from a different culture. Or the same belief, and the mediator is from a different belief. Cultural mediation as a community practice. This is a broader term for initiatives that build relationships between cultural and social spheres. It often involves using art and culture as a tool for community revitalization, social inclusion, and fostering new relationships between people and public spaces. This is what Professor John Paul Ledra called conflict transformation. How can you use culturally sensitive tools to build social cohesion and inclusion? Sometimes it involves folk tales, it involves singing, dancing to achieve social cohesion and inclusion and foster new kind of relationships. Tips for the mediator. Be aware of your own cultural biases. All of us have cultural biases, and it is important to be aware of our own biases so that we can avoid letting them influence our mediation practice. Very important. So, and in areas where you have no-go area, please do not venture into it just because you're a good mediator. Educate yourself about different cultures. The more you know about different cultures, the better equipped you'll be to understand and mediate disputes involving disputants from different cultural backgrounds. I give you another typical example. I teach as a course civil military relations in the university. And one of the things that I've noticed is that military and civilians have two different cultures. I remember telling a soldier, a senior soldier, that look, the best way to teach is to elicit information from your students or from the participants, who in any case don't come tabula rasa. They have experiences, they have this, they have that. And at the end of the day, the officer told me the only way I instruct my students is because they are coming from zero knowledge. So I instruct. I don't understand what you mean by facilitate or teach. So that's a different culture altogether. There is nothing you can tell a soldier to understand that sometimes consultation and consensus building is better than instructions and command and control. So use a culturally appropriate mediation process. The mediation process must be adapted to the cultural needs of the parties. For example, if the parties are from a culture that values harmony and consensus, the mediator may want to use a more collaborative mediation style, focusing the parties on what is in need for them and the relationship and what that relationship means. All right? So this is just how every phase of the mediation is influenced by culture. Getting to the table is one. Before you get parties to the table, different cultures demand different approaches. I'm sure some of you from the North must have heard the language Bashiga. So how do you invite a woman in marriage whose culture says a man should not enter? So you must pay attention to that. So the way you get a diplomat to the table is different from the way you get those of us in civil society. So be aware of that. Getting to the table is where the culture begins. In stock taking, like I said earlier on, you notice that some people will come positional in nature, some people collaborative in nature. So in taking stock already, the story from A might differ from the story from B. And then You also notice that what is of interest to A might be not of interest to B. So how do you, as a mediator, look for the middle ground? Digging deeper. In digging deeper, again, be mindful that as part of your mediation exercise, in digging deeper, you often meet roadblocks. Why? Because some people are not expressive in nature because their culture does not allow them. A woman might have been told, you dare not speak ill of your husband. So can you imagine that woman who is denied of sex in marriage? How do you think that woman is going to express herself? Or young girls or young boys don't speak when elders are talking. How would the person express him or herself if he's engaged in teenage mediation, for example, or juvenile? So in understanding the interests and needs of the parties, just note that party A may not have expressed herself very well just because of cultural barriers. Then finding solution. Always look for solution that is culturally sensitive to both parties. So I know that some people have said, okay, to ensure that we have not just end of our mediation, but to re-establish our relationship, visit each other. Be sure that the culture of A and B accepts that. Otherwise, that solution might not work, right? And then the same thing with the agreement and closure. How do you cancel out that which culture does not accept and only go for that which is agreeable to the parties in terms of their belief, in terms of their culture, in terms of their worldview? Remember, in mediation, it is not must that you can resolve all of the issues in dispute. It can be all or some of the issues in disputes. Let's end by looking at the culture, the mediator, and the mediation dilemma, just like a summary of what I've presented so far. So here is the mediator's culture and values, the mediator's own culture and values, what the person holds dear. What is it that the person cannot accommodate? I have been in meeting, having worked in an international organization that involves different culture and religion. And we say, let's start with a Muslim prayer and end with a Christian prayer. And the pastor walked out. I said, no, that would be against my belief. So are you that kind of person? So what is your own culture and values? What are you ready to trade? And what are you not ready to trade? You might be a good mediator, but because of your own belief and your own cultural biases, you may not be good in certain mediation. So identify, understand, be aware of your culture and values and what you can trade and what you cannot trade. I just gave you an example of my colleague, as exposed as he or she is, who told me, I will never mediate when it comes to anything lesbian or gay. Now, what is the cultural truth versus process? As a mediator, you're a process manager, but there are some basic facts about culture. So no matter how your process is, you need to pay attention to culture. You know, in mediation, we say, let me use my creativity to say, start from the right or start from the left. What if you're in a culture where they don't allow women to speak first? How do you balance power? What if you're in a culture where the elder is the spokesperson? How do you balance power? And yet the youths are saying we have come of age. How do you balance that? How do you determine now how to start? So cultural truths versus process. The pressure to resolve. Every mediator comes with this. There's always the pressure to resolve. I try to avoid this when I say the dispute is not mine, the resolution is not mine. I'm a process manager. If they resolve and I have managed the process very well, I am successful. But the resolution is their own, not mine. That does not remove the fact that every mediator is always under pressure to resolve, right? Then you look at the parties' cultural differences and abuse of process. So because only men speak in our climb, it means the women are shun out. So how do you deal with the parties' cultural differences and when it starts leading to abuse of process? How do you deal with that? All this, I have captioned it as the dilemma of a mediator and the cultural realities. And in all this, you also have an understanding of the spoken language, the body language. How do you deal with that? How do people perceive your clothes? How do they perceive your chain? How do they perceive your perfume? Do they see you as elitist? What are the unspoken language that are not said loudly? But more importantly, the external influence and expectations. And then, of course, neutrality and perception. In mediation, we say perceived partiality is as good as partiality. So you may be impartial, you may be neutral. What about the perception on the basis of your culture? You're coming to mediate between a Christian and a Muslim, and you're a Muslim. How will the Christian perceive you? You're going into an area and you're wearing a chain with a cross pendant. How does that affect your reality as a neutral third party and the perception of the parties just because of the way you dressed? I do hope I have opened enough areas that we can now engage in conversation in the next 25 minutes. I thank you.
Your Excellency, Dr. Chukwemeka, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. Thank you. So quickly, we'll take our questions and comments. We have in the chat box already. This is coming from Gloria. I said it is an amazing, insightful webinar. Thank you. Thank you. And a clap from Joycey. If you have a question, can you use the raise hand feature, or you make use of the raise hand feature? A lot of reactions going everywhere. Thank you. Thank you. We are glad to have with us today. We have Madam Chinyere, I saw her earlier. Good afternoon, ma. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for joining. So for questions, can you make use of the raise hand feature so we can take that before we close today? Okay, this question is coming from Udo. He said, sir, how can a legal practitioner become?
I'm losing you, Joshua. Or is it from my end? Can you hear me? I've lost Joshua. I'm not sure whether it's from me.
So can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Sorry, the network took me out. Yes, there's a question in the chat box that how can a legal practitioner become a member of ICMC?
Okay. Should I take it one after the other? I should take a couple. Joshua, I'm waiting for your guidance on that.
Okay. I think let's take it one after the other.
Okay. How can a legal practitioner become a member of ICMC? I'm sure Joshua will be happy to share that with you after this, but you go through a training depending on the level you have gotten to your legal practitioner and some courses you may have taken in dialogue and mediation or other ADR practices. If you have taken a couple of courses, you might get a waiver not to join as an associate member, but probably a member or even something higher than a member. We have different training across Nigeria and outside Nigeria, and it is all reflected in our training calendar, which we publish at the end of each of our mediation year, which is normally the last week of November. So if Joshua is able to get your details, he'll be able to share the training calendar with you, and you can choose the training that is closer to you or that your work permits you to participate in. We also have virtual trainings and we have physical trainings. So it depends on the one you are interested in participating in. And like I said, depending on the level you have gotten to and also the trainings you have acquired in the past, you might get a waiver to go to the next step. That will be determined by the Secretariat. Joshua, do you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you very much. All I would just say is for more information on how to become a member of ICMC, I would recommend that you send expression of interest to icmctrainings@gmail.com. That mail in the chat box now. ICMC trainings@gmail.com.
Okay, I also saw a hand up if you can recognize
so we can provide you more guidance on how to become a member of the institute. Another question in the chat box says that how can a mediator bring parties in marital conflict who have positive minds propelled by their different cultural belief, which is threatening the marriage to shift grounds? From Jonathan.
Yes, as I said earlier on, sometimes it becomes even a bigger dilemma because there are different cultural and interests involved in maritime disputes. You can imagine if the dispute is between a Nigerian and another person from a different culture, one focusing on business, one focusing on relationship. So that's already a problem in itself. But what a mediator will always do is to find a way to balance power. In the event that a mediator is unable to balance power, remember that mediation is not the only dispute resolution mechanism. You can refer them to arbitration. But should they opt for mediation, then it also means that the first thing that you would do as a mediator is to study the culture of both parties in disputes. Understand their preferences, understand their interests, and understand their needs in the conflict. And in also providing your management of the process, make sure that your own idiosyncrasies and also your cultural preferences do not creep into the mediation process. Again, where you feel you cannot, I think it's always better to opt out or go for co-mediation. Go for co-mediation. A colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine, was once involved in a juvenile mediation in Canada. Canada is one of the countries that have practiced family mediation for as long as I can remember. But this was involving two teenage girls, one from Africa, one from Canada. And what was the bone of contention? The African girl says each time she brings her food, the Canadian girl will say it smells. So the girl couldn't take it again and beat the hell out of the Canadian girl. And my former colleague, was asked to mediate. And she told me that the first thing she noticed is that when she heard the case, she was already in her head saying, this is my girl, this is my sister. So already she was biased because of her culture. So, but she had to remind herself that she's a mediator and actually now went and brought another Canadian mediator. So they had a co-mediation. So that would be my advice. But it is on case-to-case basis.
Very much, sir. Thank you. I think the next question says, in a situation where you have an online mediation scheduled involving parties that have little or details of the cultural dynamics. Okay. Oh, I think that's not the complete question. Let me take another. I am cross-cultural intelligence practitioner based in. I want to thank Dr. Eze for this insightful presentation. I recommend this training for lawyers who are planning to relocate out of their home countries to a different country. Thank you. Thank you. That comment is coming from Vincent. Thank you. If you have your hand raised, please, can you signify again so I can send you the prompt to unmute your mic? Okay, so this question is from Samuel. In a cultural environment where the elders is assumed to always be right, how does a mediator strike a balance?
Yeah, again, it is the same power balance. The more you know about the culture of the parties in disputes, the more you provide a more nuanced process. Remember, you are a process manager. Remember, you're a process manager. When mediators begin to look at themselves as solution givers or conflict resolvers or whatever that means, or they are the ones to resolve the disputes, they are crossing the line of what they are supposed to be. What you're supposed to do is to facilitate a process of communication between the parties in disputes. Once you have that at the back of your mind, you are rigid to the process, but soft on the parties in disputes. The dispute is their own. The control over the process is yours. The control over the outcome is theirs. So when somebody starts with, I am right or I'm not right, also remember that it's the same thing that happens with negotiation. I will always ask people, have multiple. Can you still hear me? Okay. Have multiple skills as far as ADR is concerned. It was the same thing, and I keep giving example of Jos Plateau. It was the same thing that happened to us. You know, in anything that you call indigenous settlers, it is positional in nature already in itself. But how did we go about it? We started with dialogue. Because dialogue does not negotiate, dialogue unveils and opens discussion. Dialogue is inquiry in nature, is more relaxing because you don't even have an agenda. You just begin to discover and understand how parties feel in that conflict. John Paul Ledra called it envisioning. You can start by asking communities, how do you want to see your community in the next 10 years? I can assure you that everybody always have an idea about how to make that community, what they want the community to look like in the next 10 years. You're beginning from the known and moving to the unknown. Nobody is going to say, I'm Mr. Right or I'm Mrs. Right, because you have not even created an atmosphere that makes it look like you're negotiating an outcome. So begin with a dialogue. How do you want each other? If it is a relationship, how do you want your society to look like in the future, right? Then they finish answering that question. The second question I always ask is, now this is beautiful. You all almost have the same ideas about how the society can be better. What can you contribute? What do you expect others to contribute? And what is difficult for you to let go? You're already moving all of them at the same speed in the same direction. By the time they finish that, then you can go and check what constitutes agreement and what constitutes differences. And you begin to deal with that. By then, you have created an atmosphere that no longer gives anybody opportunity to say I'm right or wrong. So, marital disputes. How do you want your children to look like in future? They will always have an agreement how they want them to look like. So how do you, as a father, what do you think you will contribute to this? What do you want the mother to contribute? What is it you can let go and what is it that you cannot let go? That's always an easier way to start. By the time parties now settle through dialogue, you can step into mediation. I don't know if that is helpful, but it's not.
That was very helpful. Yes.
It's not a hard and fast rule. It is all about the intuitive nature of the mediator, the intuition of the mediator.
Thank you very much, sir. I think one more question from Kende before we close for today. It says, sir, please, what will you recommend in a marital mediation involving spouses of different religion where conflict centers on disagreement on the religion their children will adopt?
That's a complex one. But like I keep saying, you know, religion is personal, right? So probably that is where consensus building will matter. And if I am to go into that kind of mediation, you may cross the line for mediation and go into the realm of counseling, which is in itself ethically wrong for mediators. So again, look for what mediation can resolve and what it cannot resolve. Because for me, I would suggest, but that will no longer be on the realm of a mediator. I would suggest, why don't the children go for your own religion this week and go for mine next week? And we give them options to choose from, right? But that's not the role of a mediator, right? That is another dispute resolution mechanism, which is no longer mediation. So again, evaluate, do your conflict analysis, evaluate the parties in disputes, evaluate their background, and see whether indeed it is what mediation can handle, or whether you are under obligation to recommend other dispute resolution mechanism, especially if you don't have skills in that.
Awesome. There are other questions, but because of our time, I will say we'll take it some other time. Just a few questions I would also like to ask. Sir, please, with your permission, can we share your slide to our participants? And
oh, it belongs to them. It belongs to them, actually. So it belongs to them and ICMC, so that's fine. So please go ahead and share with them.
It was actually great. So for our participants who are interested in getting certificate of participation, this gives you a 2 CPD unit in addition to the units you already have. For those who are interested in climbing the next cadre of membership, your payment for certificate of participation gives you these 2 CPD units, and you have to pay just 5,000 naira. You can visit the link on your screen, bit.ly/webinar CER, and the certificate of attendance will be sent to your email address. The certificate of attendance will be sent to your email address. And this announcement is for our for people in Lagos who would like to become a member of ICMC. The next Mediation Skills Accreditation and Certification course will be holding in Lagos from 6th of October to 10th of October at Maker House, Ikeja, Lagos State. If you are interested, you can either scan this QR code or visit your screen or send a message to the mails that we have, the icmctrainings@gmail.com or info@icmcng.com. Distinguished participants, the largest ADR conference in Africa is coming up, which is the ICMC Annual Conference and Induction Ceremony. This is also to encourage all our members, our non-members, fellows, and international delegates to register now, because the early bird registration is ongoing. For associates, it's 20,000. For members, it's 25. As we can see the rest category on our screen. You can visit the www.icmcconference.org to make payments, or you make payment to our GTCO bank. On the account number is displayed on your screen. The early bird registration will close 20th of October 2025. I can see messages in the chat box that I need the certificate. You can visit
Joshua, I think they've lost you again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. Please, can you repeat what they should do with the certificate? They didn't get that.
Okay. So for the certificate of attendance, I will send a link where you make payment to our email address. the link to register for the conference, and also where we will download the course material. I will send that to our email address today. The network has been really messy in Abuja today, but hopefully that will be rectified. So once again, without further ado, I would like to say a very big thank you to all our participants, and mostly to our guest speaker today, Dr. Chukwuemeka B. Eze, the first Deputy President of the Institute of Chartered Mediators and Conciliators. Thank you so much for that great presentation. We appreciate you. So
thank you.
Thank you, and have a good evening. Enjoy the rest of the day.